Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Zsuzsa Csergő, Director of Virtual ISN, and I'm here to welcome you to this important event that focuses on one of the most consequential aspects of the humanitarian catastrophe unfolding as a result of Russia's war against Ukraine. I would like to thank Cynthia Buckley, who is going to join us soon, a colleague and longtime ISNer, professor of sociology at the University of Urbana-Champaign, for helping to organize this panel and also being part of it. And we are thankful to our colleagues from Ukraine, especially Professors Volodymyr, Dubovyk, and Oksana Mikheieva, for their willingness to be here under the current circumstances and to share with us their perspectives on the issues of internal displacement. Our moderator is Professor Oksana from Tufts University, my longtime colleague and member of the ESN team that has been shaping the direction of this association for many years. Oksana has been almost continuously volunteering her time in the past weeks to provide expert opinion on various venues about the war, while also teaching her classes at Tufts. So I'd like to thank you, Oksana, for giving us your time today again. And I will give you the virtual floor immediately. Let me just spare you the housekeeping part of the work and remind our audience of the usual Virtual ISN script, which is the following: that our panelists will give short presentations, and their short bios will be posted in chat when they are speaking. We use both chat and Q&A, and we use these for different purposes. Q&A is the place for questions from our audience. Please feel free to begin typing in your questions as presentations are going on. And the questions in Q&A will be read by the moderator, who will be in charge of running the Q&A after the presentations. We are using chat as a place for posting panelist bios and any suggestions for relevant literature, publications, sources that scholars participating on the panel or in the audience would like to share with the rest of us. So Oksana, over to you.
Thank you very much, Zsuzsa. And of course, thank you for our panelists who have joined us to talk about this important phenomena, crisis, issue with internal displacement in Ukraine, right? We have unprecedented internal displacement. We don't have actually the numbers, if there are estimates or some sort of counting of people who left Ukraine as refugees, since they crossed one of the international borders. But we do, and the number is now, I think, around 3 million, right? It's really high, and it keeps going up. We don't even have an approximate number of people who are displaced within Ukraine. So that's, but the numbers are obviously also very high. Ukraine didn't have much internal displacement up until 2014 because it didn't have internal conflicts. But of course, since 2014, with the war, when the war started in Donbass and Russia annexed Crimea, we had substantial internal displacement, and now there is, much larger, we can say, second wave in a way. So some probably panelists will share with us some lessons or some implications, for example, that what happened over since 2014 and how what's happening now is maybe similar or different, or what lessons could be learned, and of course other points of analysis and discussion and important implications for us all to keep in mind. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter, Volodymyr Dubovyk, who's a political scientist at Odessa National University. Oh, actually, Professor Buckley is in. Hello, Cynthia. We are just starting. And we actually have you first, kind of originally scheduled. I don't know if you're still willing to do this since you just came in. Oops. Looks like Cynthia disappeared again. What shall we do? Zsuzsa, what do you think? Is she back? Ah, here she is.
There we go. Could I please have the screen?
The screen share, right? Who can do that? Like, I don't think I have the... Zsuzsa or Lisa, will you enable screen share?
Lisa can do it.
Okay.
My
Yes.
apologies.
That's all right. Yes, so we'll hear first from Professor Buckley from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She's a sociologist and she's been working on migration issues, so she will share her insights with us.
I'm hoping to. Good afternoon, and thank you all once again. Thanks to ASN for excellent programming on breaking events in Ukraine. There seems to be a little bit of a problem with the slide share. My apologies. And it's not working, Oksana. So I'm just going to go ahead and go.
We can. I can see your slide.
Okay, let's give her a chance. Here we go. I want to speak very, very briefly about just conceptualizing and counting displacement in Ukraine with a focus on the internally displaced. This really comes out of demographic studies of conflict and particularly armed conflict. The standard joke is demographers are people who lack the joie de vivre and excitement to be certified public accountants. This may seem like very dry and perhaps even boring administrative elements, but what I'd like to do is raise some questions about how we are able and how we are unable to document and count the number of people being displaced and their regions across Ukraine during this very tumultuous period. The displacement after the invasion in February is enormous, right? From a population of an estimated 44.1 million, 1.6 million were already internally displaced within the first 12 days of the war. Post-invasion estimates from UNHCR, we're looking at in the next perhaps 2 to 3 months, 3 to 5 million refugees. We're already well past 3. And within the next month and a half, they anticipate 7.5 million internally displaced persons after the first 2 months of the conflict. The projection right now is that 12 million will be in need of medical care within the next 3 months, and more than 18 million will be directly affected. Now that's over 40% of the population, and this is a trajectory that far exceeds the projections that were made for Yemen. Yemeni citizens in that conflict, and indeed is a much more rapid process of displacement than that was observed in Syria. So this is a crisis of global proportions. There are a lot of challenges in terms of documenting displacement, just a few of them listed here. Border crossings actually are quite well documented and available at the UNHCR website for each one of the individual border crossings into Europe. However, people are going back and forth across the border, oftentimes getting families settled and then adults returning into Ukraine. And so our border crossing data isn't matching up with refugee status data. Particularly going into Belarus and Russia, the passportization efforts in Donbass have made things complicated as well in terms of what is being reported in terms of exodus from Ukraine. We have a fairly sizable number of third country residents and some stateless residents who, again, are crossing perhaps into Europe, perhaps into Russia, oftentimes into Belarus, and going through questionably documented entrance into Poland. This further exacerbates the crisis of counting. And we also have very limited area access. Mariupol, of course, is estimated to have over 300,000 IDPs at this point in time, but this is really a very, very tenuous estimate because there are not the security levels available for people to go in and do more systematic estimations. We also have a large number of populations that have constricted mobility, both due to the conflict itself, but also due to disruptions with gas supplies and transport. And so these all sum up together to make it a very, very difficult process to count. That's why we're so fortunate to have our two experts from Ukraine. In terms of the mobility as well, this brings into a thorny issue the idea of who becomes an internally displaced person and who simply becomes homeless. This has been a recurrent problem in terms of the way in which international agencies count those who have had their homes taken away because of armed conflict. This is going to be a serious issue, perhaps specifically in the south and east of Ukraine. On the positive, and this is an area where we have little positive information, Ukraine is well situated to perhaps set a new standard in accuracy for the accounting and counting of displacement and refugee populations, sadly, because it already had substantial experience, both at the governmental level as well as the international NGO level with IOM and many other organizations having a long-term interest in working with the Ukrainian displaced population from Donbass. And so there is hope here that we may be able to find a much better basis for documenting this humanitarian crisis. Counts matter both in the short and long term, and we can talk about this later, both in terms of justifying international aid as well as distributing aid across regions. But in the longer term, we really need to be thinking about what can durable solutions look like in a situation where you have had substantial housing damage. According to the estimates, as of this morning on March 17th, there have been over 1,700 residences or households that have been destroyed during the conflict. This is a woeful underestimate by most of my contacts on the ground, and I'm sure our colleagues will have better information on this. We need to think about durable solutions 6 months out, 12 months out, 2 years out to really address the needs of displacement in what we hope will be a soon to arrive post-conflict time. We also need to think about who are we counting in terms of the internally displaced. Are these people who are in the same city they were resident in and have lost their housing? Oftentimes they get counted as homeless. Oftentimes you need IDP counts that look at people who move to a different location. Given the size of the major cities in Ukraine, this could be somewhat problematic. Moving across town in Kiev is a substantial move, but may not fit perfectly with the way in which we count IDPs. And then lastly, we need to think about where we can actually get data in terms of the number of people who are displaced and the number of housing units that are damaged. This is, again, data from UNHCR as of this morning that highlights where we've seen substantial conflict and bombing, but also some estimates here in the blue bubbles of where the IDP population is thought to be. This to me, again, whoops, sorry about that, highlights the fact that we are not quite accurate in terms of our estimations of who's been displaced, because in general, the places where they are able to conduct surveys and generate estimates are really all in the West. Throughout this region, which we know to have generated substantial internal displacement, we are not able to get in to even do the estimates. And so as of today, 1.9 million Ukrainians are thought to be internally displaced. The number that is often floated by the International Red Cross is that this is an underestimate by a factor of 3, and we will be seeing up to 7 million displaced fairly soon. With that, I will hand it over to our fabulous colleagues from Ukraine who have a much better handle on what's going on the ground. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. That was very enlightening. I mean, one thing that struck me is that Mariupol, right, which of course people are there, but at the same time they're displaced because, the housing is destroyed and they're not, right? So displacement, I mean, that's really, I think, important thing to consider, right? The displacement doesn't necessarily have to be over a long distance, right? And of course, we have all these other localities where there is destruction of civilian infrastructure and people may have moved to their neighbor's basement, right? That still makes them displaced, right? But they're probably not counted in the statistics. Really fascinating. Well, thank you very much. I'm sure there will be much more to discuss. We're now going to turn to Volodymyr Dubovyk from Odessa National University, a political scientist who is himself internally displaced, right, Volodymyr? Like, you are now in Western Ukraine. So please share with us. We lost Volodymyr. I see a message from. Okay, so in that case, we're going to go to Oksana Mikheieva, who is also, of course, from Ukraine, but she is now in the European University of Viadrina in Germany, and she also has experience with internal displacement back from the conflict in 2014, and of course, she's also an expert on the topic as a scholar. So please, Oksana.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. And sorry for my voice today. I'm sick at the moment, but I hope I have a strong to say all the I wish. And thank you very much, Cynthia. We started talking about the difficulty of counting the number of people who move within Ukraine. And when I prepare and tried to prepare my thoughts for this presentation, I understand that it's not correct to use, for example, terms IDP. It was people who relocated now in a current situation, and how it's possible to use and how to call these people, how calculate these people. It's so many questions and so many problems when we start deal with this situation. But in my presentation, I want to talk maybe about the nuances connected with these forced displacement, which are we could find now in Ukraine. Firstly, we must understand this displacement is linked to a large-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine and a number of fronts at the same time. The displacement is rapid. Large number of people are forced to move in a small period of time. It takes place in an environment of higher risk to human life and safety. Such a move is always accompanied by lack of transport, crowding of people in certain places, crashing and panic, people with disabilities, as well as pregnant women and mothers with small children in their arms or in palms are practically vulnerable in such circumstances. I observed this directly by crossing the Ukrainian-Polish border, so I saw how it's happened. They are completely unprotected in crowds and have no chance to live in a dangerous place unless their refugee flows are specifically segmented and regulated. This problem was particularly acute in the early days of the war, both for those who move within the country and those who travel outside Ukraine. As of today, both volunteers and international organizations are becoming increasingly active in addressing the problem of certain categories of both refugees and IDPs. I'm so sorry, but I called these people using this term because it's really people who internally displaced, but they have not these official statuses yet. And for example, my friends from Poland bought 2 buses that take people across Ukrainian and out to Poland. After I told them about my experience crossing the border, they start specializing in helping mothers with small children, because it's really very important to remember about the problem of different kind of people who faced with very big troubles when they tried to move from one part of the country to other, or from the Ukraine to the other country. Secondly, in these flows, both internal and external, we can talk about differences in the situation between those who are displaced on their own and those who are already evacuated from besieged and occupied cities. We work with these with the same 2 groups when we conducted our interview with people who moved in 2014, because in this time we found the same situation, this very big difference between these 2 groups, when people have these opportunities to move because they decide this, they make this decision, and absolutely a situation when people are evacuated from this dangerous zone. And Of course, in this case, we must understand that these different groups have different strategies. But using our knowledge about this 2014, we draw attention to the fact that when people move on their own, they tend to rely on their social capital, friends, people they know, relatives, anyone who can help in this initial phase of displacement. It's really very important when you have this opportunity to make a decision. People being evacuated are more dependent on humanitarian corridor directions and evacuation endpoints. These categories of people need different policies and different type of assistance. Further, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that one of the groups of people who are now forced to move either within Ukraine or across its border are people with repeated experience of forced displacement due to hostilities. And Volodymyr and me have the same experience. According to official statistics, about 1 million people already had IDP status when hostilities started in February 2022. There are people who were forced to leave the territories of Crimean Peninsula and parts of Donetsk and Lugansk regions occupied by Russian Federation in 2014. To further details this reality for you, I would like to say that many IDPs in these 8 years have managed to get back on their feet, started their businesses, take out loans and move into the new housing. Many of them have lived in, now you all know these names of the city, many of them live in Irpin and Bucha. It's city satellites close to Kyiv, but where flat prices are significantly lower than in Kyiv. Therefore, there are people who have not only repeated experience of war, shelling, forced displacement, but also repeated experience of losing all their property. Returning to the specific of counting and resettling internally displaced people, an estimate of their numbers today can only be approximate, and I totally agree with you, Cynthia. It's not possible from different point of view, from the point of security, from the point of the process of calculation of the number of these people. We identified various practices of avoiding registration in our research after 2014 as well. Such practices were practically prevalent among young people who in this way try to avoid stigmatization in 2014 and 2015, for example. The reason for avoiding accounting are now very different, maybe absolutely different. It is almost impossible to count the number of people who move on their own, using their own transport, for example, and live in the flats of friends or relatives. Moreover, we can find links between such forced displacement, for example, when a family from Kyiv goes to Western Ukraine and other family from Bucha or Irpin moves into their flat. Because in Kyiv, although it is not safe, but it is much safer compared to the zone of the active hostilities. And now we see many similar situation of this repeating eradication of different groups of people in our country. All of these people are citizens of Ukraine and are not required to register when they move to other oblasts. Why it's not possible to calculate it? We have not any reasons to register when we come to other oblasts in our country where we are citizens. In part, the authors may relate to registration of men in the context of general mobilization, but Ukrainian military registration officers are not yet interested in people who have not combat experience or who have not yet received military training before starting the war. And why the many men avoid this registration too. They don't need to be registered in our native country. Of course, we can count the people who are being evacuated centrally, as well as those who are sitting in schools, university dormitories, theaters, transforms for IDPs in many cities in different parts of Ukraine. Such people are helped by city authorities, volunteers, international organizations, and of course, all these group of helpers need to be aware of the scale of assistance to do so. Of course, they try to calculate how many people they have and how many people need to receive this help. Here again, if we go back to question about people's safety and needs, given the experience of the tragic Mariupol, and thank you, Oksana, that you start talking about Mariupol, this case, it's very tragic, but it's very, very important case for all of us. Looking at this experience of tragic Mariupol, we understand that housing significant number of people in facilities such as schools, theaters, and hospitals is extremely dangerous. I met the boy in Ukraine, and the day before I met my youngest son's school teacher. I come to the school and I talk with her about her everyday experience. They start preparing for something because all discuss these possible wars. It's possible that war will start, etc., etc. And according to her, the basement rooms in the school, which can be used as shelter during the shelling, can accommodate up to 300 people. But usually in this school, there are more than 1,000 pupils. And children, if they are in the school, will have no chance to escape in the shelling. We can project the same situation to displaced people as well. People living in such places remain at risk, and we need to do something with this. Further, vulnerability of IDPs, and especially those who leave the country, are also linked to socio-demographic parameters of the group. First of all, we are talking about women with children. This is a special category which requires specific policies and may have absolutely unexpected needs. If we come further from the tragic aspects of these relocations, for example, right now, my colleagues in Lviv, among other things, looking for Ukrainian books for children who have been forced to leave Ukraine. And it's really very unexpected, a very special need for this group. Not so tragic, but very, very specific and very interesting why these needs arise now in this situation. It must also be said that liberalization of border crossing regimes has immediately triggered an increase in transnational crime, which specialize in human trafficking and slavery. People in distress become vulnerable in the context of such activities. Also, children orphaned by war are highly in risk. Category are very in high risk. This is one category that needs special attention. There is a certain lack of control over the situation in these matters, which is so far based more on trust, but it is not an ideal tool to protect such children. It's not enough in this situation when we talk about the such kind of category. And at the end of my talk, I would like to make a few more points, which we will probably come back to in our discussion. Today's reaction of Ukrainian society to the forced and simultaneous displacement of the large number of people from active combat zones is based on 8 years of experience of professional and situational volunteerism and on long established horizontal contacts between civil society activists, between small and medium-sized businesses, international organizations, and state structures. This is why the response to the momentary displacement of people has been an immediate response from civil society. The process of moving from the shock of the outbreak of war to active assistance to those in need took less than 1 day. It's absolutely impossible. It's impossible information, but it's happened in Ukraine now. Further, no less professionally, at the level of ordinary people, any attempts at hate speech, information through apps about bad refugees, about the wrong language they speak, are stopped. The level of solidarity in society is fantastic. And it also speaks to the high level of informational hygiene and critical perception of information that saves Ukrainian society in this challenging time. I want to stop here.
Thank you very much, Oksana. That was very informative. And as you said, there is more to discuss, especially the role of civil society. We'll come back to that definitely in Q&A. So we'll now turn to our third presenter, Volodymyr Dubovyk of Odessa National University, who will share his perspective.
Right, thank you, Oksana, and I hope that my connection stays because I'm having quite bad internet here. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. Actually, about a week ago, I wrote a post on Facebook looking at this aspect of IDPs in Ukraine because no one was talking about it. Prior to that, I'm following everything that's written on Ukraine on a daily basis, reading dozens of articles every day, watching quite a lot of TV coverage as well, and no one was really talking about that. So I said, well, someone should address this issue. And then immediately, Cynthia contacted me and she said we should probably do a panel, and here's a panel. And I thank both Cynthia and ASN for putting forward this event together. There are several issues, several things that are different now from what they were in 2014 and further years after 2014 in terms of IDPs here in Ukraine. First thing, of course, is it's happening very quickly. For a lot of people in Donbass, the previous, kind of phase of becoming IDPs was much slower. Some people actually ran away quickly, but some people were continued to stream out of Donbass in months or even years after that. This time around, there wasn't a choice because people basically rushed away from the bombing and shelling and missiles, and the intensity of fighting is higher than it was in 2014 or 2015. So that's one reason, one difference. Another difference is that people can now actually, some people at least can go abroad, okay, and they can actually become refugees, which wasn't the case in 2014 again, because a lot of people in Ukraine, they've tried to do that, coming to countries like Poland, for instance, and others, and they were told, why are you here? I mean, you have a big country. You only have like 7% of territory now taken by Russians. So go somewhere else in Ukraine and find yourself accommodation and a job and so on. So people were turned away, unlike today, because today's numbers, as you said already, is above 3 million. And generally, of course, we're talking about a higher number of people because there's a much bigger area of fighting. Again, it's just a small area was in 2014. Right now, it's everywhere in the east and the south, basically. So that's why people are leaving, not necessarily just people from east and the south. I'm actually seeing a lot of people who are living from central Ukraine. And among the refugees, also a lot of people from Western Ukraine who are afraid that the war will reach them here in Western Ukraine as well. So that's a big issue, and I think I've articulated several differences between how it was in 2014, the previous wave of IDPs, and how it is now. Why we are not looking at them, I don't know, these people are invisible in many ways, so far at least. The focus is on refugees, but refugees in many ways are in a better situation. They're met, they're supported with local charities, NGOs, sometimes local government. I have a best friend of mine now living in a little resort town on the coast of Bulgaria with his family, 4 children and wife. They have 2 rooms, guest rooms at the local mayor's office, for instance, for free. Some people are in a worse situation. Some people are struggling to find apartment that they can afford, for instance, or a house they can afford. We are already beginning to see actually quite a stream of people coming back to Ukraine because of their experience in Europe, because it's overcrowded. Not everywhere you can be registered quickly. People probably expected some financial assistance, which is not forthcoming necessarily or not that quickly. So they're coming back. But the focus is on refugees, not on IDPs, because people just jumped in their cars or in train and they come to Western Ukraine, as Oksana has said already before me. They don't have to register here. They just find a place where they can stay, and they're staying. Some of them are, staying with their friends or family members somewhere in Western Ukraine. Some are not that lucky, and they actually have to rent apartments or houses. And we need to understand that the big number of those people probably have some savings that would get them through for some time, but a lot of them don't. They only have a few of those savings, which would be a problem for them in the longer term, because they're probably okay with, 1 week, 1 month of paying the rent. But when it becomes like 2-3 months or half a year or something, that becomes a problem for a lot of these people, and they are disattached, from their works because many of their jobs they are no more. I mean, they're not working. Many of them are not getting any salary. For instance, me, I'm getting my salary of university professor doing online lectures from here in Western Ukraine, but others couldn't do that. When their job is destroyed or something, their factory is not working anymore, or their enterprise is not working. So that's becoming a huge issue then, and they are indeed preyed upon as well, not just refugees abroad, but also people, IDPs here in Ukraine. Some of them are cheated already. Most of the cases, of course, the people are very hospitable and they provide all support you can get. But there are some cases when people are cheated or even robbed, because after all, you also understand that these people are running away from a war and they're having on them all their savings, basically. And, that's a tell to a lot of criminal elements who are saying, who are thinking properly. I mean, not properly, but they understand that they can attack these people and get some money away from them. So why are people becoming IDPs instead of becoming refugees? That's an interesting, issue to me, because right now, as I said, some people can be refugees, not men between 18 and 60, but everyone else. So women, children, and elderly. There are several reasons. One of those is that you actually have people who are more comfortable within their own state. Some of them never been abroad. They don't want to go abroad. They are surrounded by people who talk the same language, speak same language with them. They feel anxious often about what waits for them abroad. And now there are news trickling out of Europe, how crowded railway stations are, registration points. And people say, I'd rather stay here in my own home country, surrounded by people whom I understand. They understand me, and, the lack of knowledge of foreign languages is probably a factor as well. So that's an issue, obviously. And then also the price. I mean, the basic supplies here in Ukraine is still cheaper than in many European countries. And the rental is probably cheaper, even though it's going, in some places here in Western Ukraine, it's going up through the roof, but still cheaper than many European countries. And then, of course, some of them, they don't want to go through this exhausting and emotionally, physically exhausting extra long waits on the border, which are mostly through now. They're over, not more. But in the first several weeks, at least 2 weeks, there have been huge lines, as you know, both cars and traffic, pedestrians, towards the border. So some people said, I'd rather stay here, but not go through this waiting for, 24 hours, 30 hours, maybe in a cold weather to cross the border. So that's a problem. And then another thing is, of course, some people would like to not go away too far from their homes. They think that maybe, hopefully, this war will be over soon and they can return to their homes. And that's why they decide not to go abroad, because it might be more difficult for them, in their opinion, to get back to their homes. And I'll be concluding soon. And I should say that many people here also think that this is a large country, so Russian military probably would be able to get to the Western Ukraine, and that's probably true. We'll see. I mean, we'll be able to see within months, but if that is true or not, but that's an assumption a lot of people. So they say, why would I go abroad when I can actually stay in my own country, away from hostilities? I've seen already a lot of people who went through bombing. That's a different type of people, absolutely. And a lot of people who were, who are becoming IDPs already second times in their lives, people from Donbass, and now they moved somewhere, and now they're moving from that somewhere to Western Ukraine. So that's also a complicated issue here, psychological and so on. And most finally, as well, I mean, as I said, men are not allowed to leave. So some men just sending away their children and wives away abroad, but some are deciding to stay for a while, because there's divided families. It's a heartbreaking situation on a massive scale here in Ukraine. And that's a huge problem, and it's a very tearful situation often. But some people say, okay, I can stay with my husband, with my brother or something as a family. We can stay here in Western Ukraine. And if it gets really bad, if Russian army advances here, I mean, they'll still have time to go across the border, and then we'll decide. But for now, we'll stay as a family. So there's also this big number of motivations or factors that push people to staying within their country, but that would depend on what situation will be at the battleground. Will the front line come closer to Western Ukraine or not? Or maybe we'll have a ceasefire. How durable this ceasefire will be? Will Russian troops actually stay within Ukraine, or they will withdraw as a result of this ceasefire? There are so many factors, so many unknowns here. for the people. But so for now, they're just waiting out for this situation to somehow settle. When it becomes perhaps possible that it wouldn't settle, there'll be a different situation. But these people need a massive assistance, that's for sure. And again, a lot of international organizations and the EU and others would be focusing on refugees and helping Ukrainian refugees for a good reason. But what about those IDPs who would be soon, many of them will be soon without any money and without an opportunity to go back home, and without clear chance of crossing the border into Europe, which is already overcrowded. So there is a whole bunch of issues that IDPs are meeting, and that's where I would like to stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Volodya, for sharing your insights. So we now have some time for Q&A, and there are already a few questions coming up through both the function here and from Facebook. So let me pose maybe the first couple of questions. Milada Vahudova is asking, Oksana, I think that goes back to your point about the role of civil society groups, right? How they're addressing IDP challenge. Maybe you and others also, if you would like, to other panelists, to say a little bit more about the role civil society plays relative to local government, right? Kind of the connections there. So that's one question. And then from Facebook, there are a couple of questions. One is asking about rural-urban distinction, if any. Either, I think the question is specifically asking about refugee IDP population, but I think we can also ask about the reception. For example, I know some of my friends, some moved to the sort of very isolated parts of Western Ukraine, and some are like more in the cities, and they seem to have quite different experience. So I think this rural-urban divide would be interesting to consider. And a third question was asking about the relationship or potential impact of the IDP crisis on refugee policies. Will the issuing of IDP certificates stop, or will there be different way to deal with IDPs given a huge refugee crisis? I'm not sure where that is going, but that's a question over there. So maybe we'll go in the same order. Cynthia, starting with you, if you want to comment on any of these three questions.
I will defer to Oksana on the civil society element. She's done amazing work on this with colleagues, but I will say that it's interesting when one looks at the policy literature and also discussions within international agencies, the response to grassroots efforts from grassroots organizations in Ukraine is often lauded among people who study displacement, because it has been since 2014 extraordinarily efficient. And according to surveys done by IOM and other organizations, a surprisingly high number of internally displaced Ukrainians, as Oksana so wisely points out, feel quite welcomed and integrated. And while it was certainly a challenging period, we're able to overcome the challenges of displacement prior to this most recent invasion. In terms of the rural-urban difference, this is a unique situation in the Ukrainian context, because when we see this kind of massive displacement, it has rarely taken place in such developed economies. And so in Somalia, in other countries where you've had huge amounts of displacement, people tend to congregate in cities. For sites and services, for medical assistance, also for aid assistance. The Ukrainian pattern right now is somewhat different, with a lot of people getting out of central cities, primarily because of Russia's targeting of civilian targets in central cities and going out into rural areas. This also, in the longer term, may prove problematic in terms of getting aid and assistance out to people, particularly as shelling continues and roadways and transportation networks are likely to become much more fragile. And so I think that rural-urban split is something that will come back in the longer term to be a central element of the Ukrainian experience. In terms of the refugee policy, I think that we need to understand that this is going to be a protracted conflict, and start planning for the longer term. Volodymyr The extraordinarily, sorry, honey, those extraordinarily wise words about people thinking about not going and being a refugee in Europe because of the challenges, I think is going to become more and more common as absorptive capacity is filled in Europe. At that point in time, what will happen in terms of the calculus of choice, whether staying displaced within Ukraine or going abroad, will tend to switch these estimates of, say, 3 to 5 million refugees and just under 8 million internally displaced. As refugee policy becomes tighter, there will be more internally displaced Ukrainians. However, what we're looking at here is more of a generalized humanitarian crisis. And as Volodymyr pointed out, we have had quite a lot of attention paid to providing support and providing assistance to the massive refugee population. This is extraordinarily important. They do skew towards women and children. There are huge needs in this population. At the same time, as we look down the road, the more sizable and perhaps challenging population is the internally displaced, and we still will be struggling to get humanitarian aid to this population.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Maybe Oksana will turn to you and then to Volodya to comment on any of those questions.
Thank you, Oksana. And then start with civil society. I think it's really very important issue, and we must talk about many of these. I start from this ITS experience, but of course we have a previous experience. But I think it's important to start from the maybe research question, how to measure, how to calculate the level of civil activity in Ukraine. It was a very big issue for Ukrainian society. And for example, before 2014, usually, for example, the Institute of Sociology in Ukraine calculated this level of civil activity grounded on answer of respondent who says that they involved in such type of activity, in such organization, and it was usually 12 or 14%. But in the context of 2014, we start thinking about this civil activity in other way. And for example, I see here Victoria Sereda, she initiated a series of very important research and shows the level of situational activity, civil activity. We're faced with this phenomenon in the context of massive relocation people in 2014. When absolutely different people, maybe once, maybe twice, do something for IDPs, do something for army, etc., etc. And these different kinds of activity became very important for our society, because it's like training. You start doing this. It's very important for changing your mind that it's possible. It's absolutely possible to be involved in such activity, to start talking in this activity in specific way, because it's not about not only about activity, but it's about language, the right language, how to describe this new status, how to describe this new situation. And I think all this, our history creates absolutely new conditions. And from other hands, for example, we have a very interesting research when we tried to check this new relation between civil society organization and small and middle businesses. It's other very interesting phenomenon, how they find one and other, how they try to communicate. What's the reason, what's the motivation of this communication between civil societies and small and middle businesses? Why I talk about the small and middle businesses? Because usually big businesses have their own organization which are do something in this field of civil society, activity of helping people, etc., etc. But this communication was very interesting for us, how it's organized. Why people motivated to be involved in such activity, and we really see this interest from the both side, from business side and from civil society, and it's a part of this history of this 8 years. how people build all these networks, and all these networks exist all this time, works all this time. Many of self-organization work with people who live in so-called gray zone, how people who stay on occupied territory, how people who live near this split line between this demarcation line, this demarcation line, etc. And all these work now because all of us have this experience, not only on only official activity, organized activity, but this situational activity. And for example, according to the Victoria research, in 2014, it was more than 50% people who were involved in such situational activity. But I think now if in a good world, if we have this possibility to ask people about this, I think it will be more higher level of this activity of present-day Ukrainians in such conditions. And as a question about this relocation, or this direction of relocation to cities or countryside, in 2014, we see that people usually relocated in the city. Only small number of people come to the countryside, and we try to ask people about the reason why they choose cities, because in the cities it's maybe difficult to find flats, maybe you face with a problem how to rent houses, how to find the job, because it's a combination. In all our research we see that it's a very important combination. You have not any opportunities to rent the houses if you have no job. And all IDPs need this combination of job and renting the houses for successful being in new location. But many of them choose the city because they want to be won't be very close to different kind of state organization which gives help. Many of IDPs choose Kyiv because it's very close to main organization, to main offices, and it makes these processes easy for many of them, how to communicate with these structures and how to receive many of their answers to their questions. And in this situation, we see the same, but I think it's very but I think now we have not enough information for comparison between the situation in 2014 and now, because we don't know the future development of the events. We don't know what will be in future. And of course, now we work with a very specific time for many of these people. I compare this with my experience is in 2014, when we all and many our interlocutor who give us this in-depth interview about the experience says that they don't believe in some long period of their relocation. All people believe that it takes maybe 2 weeks, and after that we'll come back to our homes, to our flats, and all stops, and normal life come back to our life. But now I see the same mood for many of these people, because they still thinking in this logic that maybe war stops tomorrow, maybe war stops in 1 week. But it's a very specific situation, because in our previous research, I called it this postponed life. You think about the ending of situation, and you have not real life during all this period. Maybe I stop here. I don't want to occupy the time.
Okay, Volodya, do you want to comment on any of these questions?
No, not really. I think they covered this pretty extensively. So yeah. Okay,
so let's move to the next batch then. There is another question, also sort of I think built up on the IDP, sort of the strain that the challenge of the displacement puts on the local governments. The question is asking, given that after 2014, the local governments were already struggling with capacity, financially, political will to help IDPs, and obviously it was a smaller number. What can we expect now, right? Especially Oksana, you were just alluding that, yes, through many IDPs expect that the conflict will end, right, and they'll be able to go back. But if this conflict drags for weeks or potentially even months, right, and we have even more displacement, right, it places even more strain. And I would say not only on the government, but also on civil society, right? Civil society obviously is critically important, but sort of it seems like this both fatigue and also kind of the strain of the resources. If you have millions and millions of people, right, like that, and the conflict is not ending for them. So I guess that would be one sort of question, right? What can be, if we were to project going forward, right? Like the role of government, role of civil society, and the challenges with this massive and potentially protracted displacement. And another question is quite interesting. Violeta Habibulina is asking, what about Russian citizens who became IDPs in Ukraine, right? Because it may not be that many, but essentially the question is about those citizens of Russia who left Russia even before the war, because they disagreed with the Putin regime and they came to Ukraine, to escape sort of living under Putin's authoritarianism, right? Now they're also getting displaced within Ukraine. On the one hand, we can say they have Russian citizenship, theoretically they could go to Russia, but of course, if they escaped to begin with for political reasons, like it's even less likely that now they would want to go back. And again, given the visa restrictions and so forth, it would be also difficult for them to become refugees, right, and leave Ukraine. Again, I don't know how many, like if that's sort of how sizable this group is, but I think it's interesting, to think about, what about these maybe less typical IDP categories, right? And I think these Russian citizens would be one, right? And again, it also goes to the attitudes, very understandable anger, like outright hate, right, of the Russians kind of as a group. I think that's fair to say that that's quite prevalent in Ukraine, given what has been going on. So if any of you want to comment on either of those questions or both, please go ahead. I'm just gonna let I'm not gonna call anybody. Like I don't know who wants to. Cynthia, you're muted.
The number of refugees going into the Russian Federation as well as Belarus is quite low. And so there are sizable populations still in Ukraine that either have access to a Russian passport given previous passportization processes, or are Russian nationals, as Violeta points out. To date, there does not seem to be much distinction taking place on particularly the Polish border about letting Russian passport holders cross the border. There were, as we all know, some very disturbing accounts about problems with other third country nationals, particularly non-white third country nationals crossing borders. And as a reaction to that, there has been redoubled efforts, particularly among the Poles, which is really quite admirable, to try to accommodate as many third country nationals as possible.
Hold on, I am on Zoom. I can't talk.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I really can't. Can you email me instead?
Can I come back later?
In like, I think I have to leave it. I'm in a live panel. You have to text me or email me. Okay, yeah, sorry. Sorry, there are people coming in. I don't know what to do with them. So yes, so just to get back on this, so basically, Cynthia, you're saying to Violeta's question that people who have Russian passports actually are able to cross the border, right? Like even if they don't have a visa, from what we know. Again, you're muted.
I'm trying to get off. Never say never, of course. I'm just simply saying that the Poles in particular have redoubled efforts to be much more accommodating to third country nationals at the border. I think your wise comment, Oksana, about hostilities and personal animus, given the war situation, may be at play. But I would argue that Poland in particular, and I think Moldova as well, have reported across the board that they have given specific detailed instructions to facilitate treatment, positive treatment of all third country nationals, and that includes Russian citizens.
Thank you. I don't know, Oksana or Volodya, do you want to comment on any of these two questions? I mean, for the IDPs, it's sort of like...
Because I have not information for making some conclusion about this group. I know personally several person who received Ukrainian citizenship, who come from Russia. They were really opposite to the Putin's regime now in Russia. And as I can see, they now fighting on Ukrainian side. And but it's separate cases. I don't know about the group, and I don't know about all this situation. I have not data to make some conclusions towards the Russians in Ukraine and their status now in Ukraine. But maybe it's not only about Russians in Ukraine now. We have other very big issue in Ukraine. We have many international students, and they face with different kind of the problem. If, for example, in the context of this forced relocation, they relocated from the city which are now in the zone of armed conflict, and they try to leave the country but face with many problems because they leave the country with other many people in one time, and nobody separates this group, and they have the common rule for all people who try to go across the border and stay in long line before this crossing the border. And it really creates a very, very specific situation. And some of them pretended to be an international person in Ukraine and have a separate rules for crossing the border, or many of them staying in this line. For example, when I cross the border, after my crossing the border, I met women, she's from New York, and she stayed all this time in this long line. One day, all day, she stayed in this long line and across the border according to the common rule for all person who stay in this line. And I think it's a very big issue too. Well, because I'm personally, I understand that it's not their war. They are not involved in this war. These international students, for example, who are in Ukraine now. But what to do with them and how to solve their problem in this case?
Thank you, Oksana. We lost Volodya, unfortunately, again, maybe his connection will come back. Let me ask maybe another question. I don't think there is one in the Q&A now, but one thing that I was thinking, I think you mentioned maybe, Oksana, briefly during your presentation, kind of the contrast, well, at least potentially one contrast with displacement after 2014, because after 2014, at least in the parts of Ukrainian society, there was the sentiment that people who are displaced from Donbass are at least in part to blame for the displacement, right? Because they were the ones who, called Putin to come, they gathered with the pro-Russian flags. They wanted this sort of Russian spring, right? And then, they basically called the war on themselves, right? And that led, again, I'm sure that we have, you probably have better data of sort of how widespread this was and if there was variation across, but there were certainly, like, say, ads, like we don't rent apartments to people from Donbass, right? That was quite, especially against men, right? If like other Ukrainian men from other regions were fighting in the war, and these men from Donbass, came as internally displaced, and it seems like now, like that's just not an issue as far as saying any kind of animosity, potential animosity against the IDPs, with a possible exception, right? If somebody has Russian passport, right, that may be a different story, but sort of in general, right, there is much more unity between the non-displaced and displaced Ukrainians, right? And I wonder, first of all, if you think that's accurate, and secondly, you think that might have some implications. We long had, since 2004, right, this slogan in Ukraine is hidden is Zahid Razom, right, which means East and West together. That was the slogan of the kind of pro-European, pro-Western protesters that they wanted, but of course there was both during the Euromaidan in 2014 and during Orange Revolution in 2004, when I think the slogan first appeared, there were, substantial differences between East and West. And could we say, kind of, if we were to look down the road, that maybe this East-West divide in Ukraine, again, in some ironic way, due to Putin, right, is basically going to be the thing of the past? Or is that maybe too much to hope for? That's my question to both of you.
I will leave it to you.
Maybe Maybe
Well,
I add something, of course.
I think that's a great question. I do think that even more so in my take on this was much more focused in terms of thinking about the 2014 through 2020 exodus out of Donbass, not just as a huge demographic shift, but an incalculable loss of private wealth, right? People lost houses, they lost property, they lost livestock, and that became much more troublesome. For people who work in IDP policy, that experience was also really instructive because displacement was very visibly flexible. People were going back and forth over border checkpoints. And this continued even during the COVID pandemic, right? So there was this idea of displacement and then temporary return and then coming back that made things different than textbook examples of displacement in other war zones. That may well be something that emerges as the conflict dies down, that people may want to return to Kiev to see, or the outlying regions of Kiev to check on property or to check on family members or to check on other types of assets and then come back. And so I think part of it is about reception and this judgment about leaving or coming or staying, but I think too, it's complicated by the fact that in the Ukrainian case, displacement is much more fluid and quite a bit different than standard approaches to war and displacement that have been utilized throughout, say, the Middle East in the Syrian case. Oksana, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Cynthia.
I'll hand it to you.
From my point of view, it's really very complicated issue, which have a long and short history, and maybe long, middle, and short history. And we have so many details for understanding how it's working in Ukrainian society. First of all, I want to start from this idea of using the technology of geographical division of electorate in Ukraine. It was during long time, and from my point of view, it stopped only after Orange Revolution. It stopped work such clear and with such results how it was before 2004. And then step by step, we start to understand this artificial division between different parts of Ukraine. And it's really long processes for Ukrainian society. And when we start thinking about this situation in 2014, why people reacted in such a way, I think one very important moment, it's connected with this phenomenon of propiska, so-called propiska. In Ukraine, we inherited these practices from Soviet states, and then it was cancelled in Ukrainian society, and we changed this propiska, Soviet propiska, by registration, but it's not changed the real situation in the states. I still have a Donetskaya propiska in my passport, and when I come to the bank, I see how people reacted to my passport and start ask me about the additional documents which prove my right to be a resident of this bank. I still have such type of the problem in Ukraine, especially with bank system. Bank system stand on their position still and use this concept of propiska in absolutely clear way. But if we talk about the reaction on the level of ordinary people, on the level of average person, why it was possible to see these advertisements, it's not for people from Donetsk and Lugansk region, it's absolutely terrible in society, but I understand partially, I understand this reaction of people because they afraid on the one hand, because during long time in Ukraine, we have not a right language how to talk about the situation in east part of Ukraine. Only in 2018, we stopped call the situation ATO, anti-terroristic operation, and start use the Russian aggression and the occupied administration of Russian Federation on the parts of Donetsk and Lugansk region. And it takes so much time to change the language which we use describing this situation, describing this conflict. If we use terms anti-terroristic operation, it means that some kind of terrorist exist on these territories, and of course it's create a very specific reaction of people towards their IDPs from these territories, not only from Donetsk and Lugansk regions, because people from Crimea Peninsula experience the same, because they face with this reaction that you are called for Russian soldiers, you do something for this occupation, etc., etc., etc. And I think it's really so many factors which create this situation. But now in this second wave of Russian aggression, or in the context of this long war, which started in 2014 and now have a very active phase. Now we start talking about all this in right way. It's very important for Ukrainian society. Why we have so high a level of solidarity in Ukrainian society? Because we all describe the situation in one way.
Thank you very much, Oksana and Cynthia. Yeah, that's I think would be interesting to see how it translates, looking forward. We have two more questions from the chat and the Facebook. One question is asking what are the best ways to help IDPs, right? So there are obviously different ways to donate, to various Ukrainian causes, from the army to the children to educational areas. But is there, maybe Oksana, I don't know if you know, or Cynthia, specific ways or strategies that would be helpful for IDPs specifically? That was one question. And another question, Zsuzsa is asking about public health aspects of displacement, right? Given that it's taking place during the pandemic, given that we all know that, Ukrainian healthcare system is not the best to begin with, like what are some, or is it maybe too early to say? I mean, we don't know if, but that was another question posted. You have to unmute yourself, Cynthia, you're still muted.
I want to leave time for our esteemed colleague, but very, very quickly, Zsuzsa's, I'm going to go in reverse order. Zsuzsa's question about public health is really central. And certainly when we think about the damage to humanitarian infrastructure, I'm not speaking only of hospitals, which has been extensive, but also water systems, sewage treatment plants. The public health aspects here are substantial. The second part is that according to Ukrainian state statistics, the IDPs from Donbass that tended to stay in Eastern Ukraine tended to skew much towards the elderly and the infirm, who didn't want to go that far from their homes, understandably. Those who settled in Western Ukraine, where they could easily cross the border, tend to be families with young children disproportionately. And so the public health needs in areas that have suffered the most damage to date in Eastern Ukraine are going to be very high, simply because the composition of the population is much older. And so their needs are going to be much more extensive. And this is going to be a huge challenge. This is above and beyond the crisis in terms of COVID, particularly the low vaccination rates, but also access to straight line pharmaceuticals for chronic conditions like arthritis and hypertension, which have already become really scarce in several cities in Eastern Ukraine. And so thinking about humanitarian corridors for the distribution of medical supplies, pharmaceuticals, and perhaps even the transit of medical professionals is going to become more and more important as time goes on. I'm going to yield now to my esteemed colleague, and I'll let her finish. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think both of these questions are very interesting and very complicated. It needs maybe separate seminars for both of these questions. And of course, it's really very important. And we write many texts about how to help IDPs. And from my point of view, it's not possible to help all these persons in one way. We must segment this group, and we must find the way how to help different segments of this group and have a different kind of help, which depends of their real needs. And for example, we see a very big difference between young generation of IDPs, I mean IDPs from 2014, young generation and old generation. We have a very big difference in geography of their resettlement. For example, many people of retirement age want to be very close to their homes and using these trans-border practices for medicine care, for other reasons, for pension, etc., etc. And for example, younger generation have not any fear to rent the house because, for example, it was a problem for all generations. They have not such experience. We usually received our flats from the old generation, and we are owners of flat, but young generation have this experience before the war, how to rent the flat, how to live in rented flat, and it was not so problematic for this group of people, and they create a very interesting strategy how to accumulate their resources in one flat, how to join with other persons and share their space of one flat, etc., etc. And if we talk about the help, we have our research about mental health of IDPs. It's a very, very important issue for Ukrainian society, not for IDPs, for all Ukrainian society, but now really for all Ukrainian society, because we all traumatized of this situation. But in Ukraine, we have a low culture of using such type of services. I mean, psychologists, I mean, the psychiatrists, and usually people, average person afraid to receive the diagnosis, and only in the context of the reform of our medical sphere at all, because of Ulyana Suprun, and only after the Euromaidan, when psychologists were very actively involved in communication with people who were traumatized during this period of tragic events of Euromaidan. Now we could see some changing in Ukrainian society toward this issue, but I totally agree with you about vaccination, about the low level of hygienic practices of many people. And now when we choose between COVID and war, of course, we all forget about COVID in the context of war. But now it's become a problem for European country, because many people who stay during the 1 or 2 days in long line and long queues near the border, they have not any mask. They stay very, very close to other person. And now I see the very, very big increase in of number of cases of COVID in Germany, but I don't know the situation in Poland. I think that it's more dangerous in Poland because the cities, for example, Warsaw and Krakow, overloaded of people, overloaded of refugees now.
Thank you very much to both of you. We lost Volodymyr. He just sent an email that he had to go to a bomb shelter because of the air raid, so he won't be able to rejoin us. We, of course, hope he'll be safe. Zhuzha, oh, sorry, go ahead, Cynthia.
Oh, Oksana, if I could add one quick thing. Again, in deference to my esteemed colleague, I think in terms of providing assistance to IDPs, the usual suspects are on the ground. Doctors Without Borders is really amping up and looking at increasing their efforts by a factor of 5 within the next 5 weeks. International Red Cross is also very, very active, but I would be mistaken if I didn't defer to my colleague Elizabeth Dunn, who really, again, points to the fact that it is civil society and on-the-ground organizations that are most efficient in terms of getting help to people. So contact your Ukrainian colleagues, utilize the transfer resources that we have available to them. That gets 100% of your donations directly to people who might need it the most. Nothing against these agencies, I work for them, but you'll find
I want to
much more.
emphasize this. I posted in the chat just, for people who may want to specifically focus on the medical end of things. The Sunflower
Exactly.
they've been, they're based in Boston. I know the founders. It's a very legitimate.
And they're extraordinary.
Yeah, and they
Thanks.
basically ship a lot of medical supply straight to Ukraine. Zsuzsa, shall we be wrapping up now, or
Yes,
I know that you said around this time. Yeah. Shall I turn it over to you?
So yes, thank you. And I just want to thank everyone for this very insightful and important conversation, for directing our attention to an aspect of the humanitarian crisis that has received less attention than the refugee crisis, obviously, because it's less visible outside of Ukraine, but it's hugely significant. And so thank you for doing this, for contributing this. And I'm sorry that Volodymyr had to drop off. It shows that he's in a country under siege. And I'm happy that he was able to be here and contribute his thoughts, his expertise on this. And I'm just in awe of our colleagues who are there, who are under these conditions, providing analysis. Excuse me. Thank you, and we will continue to try to support you any way we can. Sorry, something on that. Just want to say to our audience that our next panel, sorry, will take place next Wednesday, March 23rd. We'll be focusing on the geopolitical aspects of the war, very different dimension that is, unfortunately, that's my own personal opinion about it, is critical, right? The geopolitical aspect. So I hope you will be watching out for the announcement about that. You will be receiving it soon, and I hope to see you back next Wednesday. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Oksana, and thank you, panelists in the audience, for attending and for asking questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.